Hey guys, Dev with Crime Hive, back with another episode, and we're talking about the Letecia Stauch case. And there's been a lot of comments and questions online, and people are wondering, is Letecia a psychopath? Is she a sociopath? Is she a narcissist? Does she have borderline personality disorder? So we're going to talk a little bit about each one and clarify the differences, and I just want to know your guys' opinion. Let me know, comment, subscribe to my channel, like my videos, let me know what your thoughts are, and we're going to dig into this right here. So first off, I want to just mention a reference here. This doctor right here that we're talking about, she gives some really good definitions of what a psychopath is, sociopath, and Dr. Ramani, I'm going to refer to some of her definitions. Now, she said something really important, and she said that all psychopaths have narcissistic tendencies. And then she says that all narcissists do not have psychopathic tendencies. They're not psychopaths. So all psychopaths are narcissists, basically. They have all those traits, and we're going to talk about what those traits are to get a better idea. Now, we're going to talk more about this, but just to clarify real quick, the difference, the main difference, and this is something she points out as well, between a psychopath and a sociopath. A lot of researchers believe that psychopaths were born. They believe it may have something to do with the genetic disposition. They were really born into that into that role of being a psychopath. And then they believe that sociopaths, and again, there's a lot of research on this, a lot of differences. I'm not a psychologist or doctor, but they believe that sociopaths were really born into that environment to become a sociopath. So it was more environmental. But they're very similar, a lot of overlap, so there's a lot of confusion, and we're just going to kind of talk a little bit about the differences, so maybe you guys will have a better idea. And then, again, how does this relate to Letecia? So first thing that I'm going to talk about here is, in this article of Psychology Today, we talk about narcissists, and a lot of researchers still believe to this day that there's only 1% of the population of a true narcissist that exist out there. So very low population. And when we talk about narcissists, I'm just going to give you some of these, this really good definition here. It's a personality disorder is what we're talking about, okay? All of these are really mental health disorders, okay? And they're not really treatable. When we're talking about psychopaths and sociopaths, there is treatment for it, but there's not really a diagnosis for this. And so what we're talking about is a mental condition in which narcissists tend to have an inflated sense of their own importance, okay? A deep need for excessive attention and admiration, troubled relationships, lack of empathy for others, okay? There's this extreme confidence, but they have this very fragile self-esteem that's vulnerable to criticism. So any open criticism, people that are narcissistic tend to be very fragile in that area. Now, big difference between a narcissist and a psychopath and sociopath. Now, narcissists tend to have some sense of empathy, a little bit. It's not much, but they do care to an extent. They can show a little bit more concern. They have a little bit more guilt and shame involved. Those are the two key words, guilt and shame. There's a little bit of that going on with a narcissist, but a lot of humans out there, really just about everybody has some narcissistic tendencies out there. But big difference, there's a little bit more emotion involved. Now, we're talking about really we're going to get into the psychopath and the sociopath here. The real scientific definition of psychopath and kind of what that entails is under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. So if you hear antisocial personality disorder, this is in the DSM-5. It's really the medical book where they categorize all these disorders. And they believe that someone that has antisocial personality, psychopathy, okay, being a psychopath, for example, they have 3 or more of these traits. Regularly breaks the law, lies constantly, deceives others, is impulsive, doesn't plan ahead, can be prone to fighting and aggressiveness. They have little regard for the safety of others, irresponsible, can't meet financial obligations, and doesn't feel remorse or guilt. That's the big one right there. Psychopaths, no conscience at all. They are wired differently. And studies have shown, and this is really crazy, and we're going to look at this example here too as we talk about a psychopath, Jeffrey Dahmer, notorious serial killer. All right, been mentioned over and over again. We know a lot about his story. If you don't already, he killed several young men. He basically ate his victims. He cut them into pieces. He stored them in his refrigerator. He did experiments on them, had sex with their dead corpse. Lots of crazy stuff going on here. Now, a lot of researchers, a lot of scientists believe that he is a psychopath, and he just had this genetic disposition. All right, he already had disturbing traits growing up. He actually had a fairly normal childhood with his family. There wasn't a lot of evidence that he was, and he claims he wasn't sexually assaulted or abused when he was growing up. But you've got Jeffrey Dahmer, torturing animals, killing animals for the fun of it. He's very isolated, really kept to himself. He's very introverted. But he had a lot of, there's just this fascination of doing experiments on young men. He just didn't really care. He would kill them and just experiment with them and eat them, which is, he's not really thinking about, what these families must think about what he's doing to this person, or there's just no remorse whatsoever. So really interesting story with Jeffrey Dahmer. And that's the biggest thing, I think, with a psychopath. Now, if we're talking about a sociopath, here's a really good example, and kind of to give you a difference here. This guy right here, Richard the Iceman Kuklinski, okay? If you guys don't know who he is, really fascinating story as well. He basically was a hitman for the mob. He killed many people, and he would do this without blinking an eye. Didn't care, didn't bother him. He could carry on in his normal everyday life with his family after killing someone. He could celebrate Christmas with them and act as if nothing had happened. So he was able to compartmentalize and he essentially could carry out these vicious murders. And the mob bosses, the people that hired him as a contractor, basically to put out, when they put out these hits on people, was they saw that he had these characteristics where he showed no remorse, no guilt, no shame, and they liked that about him. Now, the thing about Richard is he had a very troubled childhood. He was abused by both his parents. Parents were alcoholics. He grew up in a very tough neighborhood. He had to really survive. So what a lot of psychologists think about sociopaths is that they had this environmental, they kind of grew up through this environment of, really harsh crime, and there's a lot of criminality involved and a lot of abuse, and they kind of acquired these learned behaviors when we're talking about kind of numbing the brain. And when we talk about no empathy, no remorse, no guilt, they kind of learn to detach from those feelings. They may feel a little uncomfortable when it comes to let's say, for example, a good example is if somebody gets stopped by a policeman, right? And the lights and sirens go on. Normal people typically will have an elevated heart rate. It's kind of that flight or flight response, sweating, pupils dilate, that kind of thing. With a psychopath or even a sociopath, they tend to be pretty calm. A sociopath might be a little bit more uncomfortable, okay? Psychopath, just as calm as can be. And they've done studies on this, and it's kind of crazy. They don't really get the elevated heart rate when something like this is going on. So, but anyway, Richard the Iceman, right? He grew up, tough neighborhood. Actually, I think he killed his first victim when he was about 13 years old. He was bullied, and he eventually ended up getting back at this kid. So, he really started on this path early on, and it just carried with him in adulthood. So, really good example of what a lot of people would classify someone as a sociopath. But again, they overlap, very similar. Now, just based on what I've told you guys about psychopaths, sociopaths, and narcissists, do you think Letecia fits in those kind of categories? What do you guys think about that? Let me know your thoughts there. The last part I want to talk about that a lot of people say Letecia may have is borderline personality disorder. This right here is really interesting because With borderline personality disorder, really what's affected, there's a lot of impulse, a lot of impulse, and also a lot of instability with this disorder. So you kind of wonder, you got to wonder, they talk about, there being an intense fear of abandonment, okay? And you wonder, was she feeling abandoned? Now, we do know that she was searching online when before Gannon was killed. She was actually looking for apartments in Florida. She was looking to even find another husband. She was actually searching to find another man. And so you wonder, was she feeling abandoned? What did she feel like she was losing control? Now, with this disorder, there tends to be a lot of mood changing going on here. Not like bipolar. Bipolar, like for example, when you're in a mania type of state, it can last for days, right? But with this, a lot of researchers say that it may only last for a couple hours. She may be in one mood, losing control, and makes these very, very irrational decisions in a very and it just doesn't think about the consequence in that time frame. So a lot of people think that she may have this. A lot of, when we talk about this, there's a lot of risky behavior, gambling, reckless driving, going on spending sprees. We all do some of these kind of things, to a degree, but we're talking about very extreme in this sense here. And then, suicidal threats, self-injury. Again, that goes back to they feel they're going to be abandoned or rejected. And so, again, this is just kind of I've done a little bit of research on this. Obviously, I'm not a doctor or psychologist. What do you guys think about that, though? From everything online, a lot of people do believe she has this. I would tend to fall more on this side. She may have some narcissistic tendencies. I don't know enough about her childhood or about her personal situation to really, say, hey, I think she's a psychopath or she's a sociopath. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think she exhibits those qualities to fit those characteristics of a sociopath or a psychopath? Again, this is Dev with Crime Hive, and we'll be back with another video. Let me know what you guys think. Take care.